Missionary Baptist Church. I am Patrick Sellers, Senior Pastor, and we thank you for tuning in on today. And hopefully that this will be enlightening and encouraging to your walk with the Lord. Let us open with prayer. God, we thank you for this time of study. Thank you for the listening ears and receptive hearts. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, beloved, on today, I want to talk about how did I get myself into this mess? Samson was a ruler, judge of Israel for 20 years. He had everything going for him, yet he was his own worst enemy. As he kept hurting himself, Samson had supernatural strength and good looks, and he had God working in his life. But he just blew it. He wasted his life and brought all kinds of troubles on himself. Samson exemplifies three of the most common ways that we bring trouble on ourselves, ways that still foul up today, because human nature is universal, and we all tend to fall into the same kinds of traps. Samson made a mess of his life because he made three fatal choices. If we can identify these three traps, we can work out the problems that we're in right now and can avoid some problems in the future. The whole story of Samson's life is given in Judges chapter 13 through 16, but we'll consider only key principles out of his life things that got Samson into trouble, things that we can avoid. One, learning from our mistakes. That's first of all. We're asking for trouble if we refuse to learn from our mistakes. Samson had two big weaknesses in his life, and he never learned to control either of them. All of his life, they plagued him, and later they caused his downfall. His first weakness was a bad temper. He often got angry. Frequently, he blew up. A primary motive for his actions was revenge. Samson killed 30 men to get their clothes because he burned with anger. He set a field of fire just to get even. Samson said to a group of men he didn't like, "Since you've acted like this, I won't stop until I get my revenge on you." Later he said, "I did to them what they did to me." And then he killed another 1,000 men. Samson's whole life seemed filled with anger, and he never quite got control of this problem. He refused to learn from his mistakes, so he just kept committing them over and over again. The other area that Samson had a weakness in was uncontrolled physical desire. He was physically strong but morally weak. He never really got control of this problem in his life either. And it caused his downfall, in fact. Samson's life was really a pathetic cycle of failures. He never learned. He kept making the same mistakes over and over again. For him, it was really kind of a game. How close to the fire can I get and not get burned? How close to the edge of the cliff can I get and not fall off? Samson deliberately ignored God's principles, particularly in the area of physical desires. So Samson played this kind of game with Delilah. She kept asking the source of his strength and kept getting teased by Samson, but each time he got a little closer to the truth. As he toyed with her, he was playing with temptation, and soon he got burned. But all of us tend to do the same thing. We say, just this one time. What's one time going to hurt anyway? Just this one time, I'm going to worry. Just this one time, I'm going to get depressed. Just this one time, I'm going to try this or that. None of us plans to be a failure. It just comes on us gradually. It's a step by step process. It's little by little we get weakened. Our whole lives don't fall apart in one day. The problem builds up over a period of time when we refuse to learn from our mistakes. You may be saying, but this is an area of my life that I just have no control over. I'm defeated in it over and over again. It's a chronic area of failure in my life, and I just don't know how to overcome it. That's just the way I am. The good news is that God says, I will give you the power to break out of the cycle of failure. When Samson finally did that, God broke his cycle of failure and gave him victory. So choosing our friends, that's the second principle we learn from Samson's life, is that we're asking for trouble if we choose the wrong friends. Somebody has wisely said, if you want to soar with the eagles, you can't run with the turkeys. You will eventually become like the people you spend the most time with. That's why it's so important to choose your friends wisely. Samson was defeated by bad associations. He had unhealthy relationships, even though God had chosen him for a special task. For even Samson's birth was a miracle. Before he was conceived, his mother could not become pregnant. God told her that she would have a special son who would be a deliverer of Israel from the Philistines. So Samson was special from the very start. but his friends led him astray. God has a special purpose for each of us, but we get ourselves into trouble when we choose the wrong friends. Here's a challenge question. Do your friends keep you from living 100% for God? Do they tear you down or do they build you up? Do you find yourself having to conform to things you don't like to do? The book of Proverbs warns us over and over again about negative associations. Constant exposure to wrong attitudes and wrong values will eventually take its toll in our lives. For it's always easier to pull somebody down than it is to lift them up. What kind of friends should you have? The kind who bring out the best in you, who lift you up, who encourage you, who make you a better person? There's another principle that we see in Samson's life that is really the most important one of all because we see it through his life. We're asking for trouble when we refuse to take God seriously. Samson was careless about his spiritual life. We never did get really serious with God, and it showed up in more than one way. In the first place, he was always doing his own thing. He lived for himself. His was basically a very selfish lifestyle, and he let his own personal desires dictate his actions. Samson lived by the philosophy, if it feels good, do it. God's plan for Samson was greatness, and that's God's plan for you. He has a purpose for your life. You weren't put here on earth by accident, but Samson's pattern was carelessness. He just he just kind of took things for granted and never really got serious, and the result was uselessness in his life. Another thing we see in Samson's life is that he never prayed about anything except before his final act. When he brought the house down, he was impulsive, he was impetuous. He did not ask God for direction. He just went ahead and did whatever he wanted to do. He would save ourselves. We would save ourselves. We would save ourselves so many problems and so much pain if we would just stop and ask God for direction before we jump into something with both feet and get all messed up. Samson turned to God only when he got in a jam. It's what you call foxhole Christianity. Lord, if you'll just get me out of this problem, I promise I'll live for you from now on. To a lot of people, God is just kind of an afterthought, a convenience. When things get tough and tight, they turn to him in desperation. But when everything is all right, they ignore him. Samson never really got serious about living for God until the very end of his life. After everything he had fallen apart, he was captured by the enemy nation. They put his eyes out. They made him grind grain at a mill, a job normally reserved for animals. Notice what happens after everything fell apart. Samson finally prayed. I wonder what kind of history Samson would have had if he had prayed right from the beginning. Why did he have to wait until everything fell apart before he finally turned to God? The result of Samson's prayerlessness is that he totally lost his potential in life. He was discredited and lost his freedom. He became a slave to the people he had been sent to conquer. Samson truly reaped what he had sowed. God never gives up. This would be a hopeless tragedy story if it just ended there, but it doesn't. The Philistines had cut off Samson's hair, which was a sign of the covenant he had made with the Lord. Samson's hair was just an outward symbol. It was not the source of his strength, but the sign of his strength. And when they cut his hair off, they were saying in effect, Samson, we're changing on the outside what's already been cut off in your heart. You're not really serious about your commitment to the Lord. But notice that the hair on his head began to grow again after it had been shaved. The process of renewal began to start. Samson repented and began to pray as he began to look to God for strength. God honored his desire. God gave him strength back, and Samson ended his life with an inspiring act of heroism. As you will recall, Samson was brought to the great temple of the false god Dagon, so that thousands of his enemies could laugh and joke about him, and also Samson's God, the true God of Israel. Samson was placed between the two main pillars of the temple, and with every last ounce of strength that God gave him in answer to prayer, he pushed the columns. He pushed the columns aside, and the roof of the huge building collapsed, killing everybody in the temple plus 3,000 people on the roof. God had sent Samson to conquer this enemy nation in the first place, and now God was able to accomplish more through Samson in his death than he did in his life. That's a sad statement on Samson's life, but he finally did defeat the enemy because God gave Samson a second chance. Samson had the greatest victory at the end of his life. In a sense, that is a comforting fact. Maybe you feel that you've messed up your life so badly that God will never love you and use you again. But remember Samson. God never gave up on Samson, and he has not given up on you. God sees your potential and he remembers why. He made you you. You were created for great things. Only as you get in the center of God's will can you discover why you were made. But if you do so, things will begin to click and fall into place. You will feel fulfilled and will become successful in God's sight as you realize that you're doing what God made you to do. Then that's the comfort of God's grace. There's something very encouraging about that, Samson. In Hebrews 11, God's hall of fame of people of great faith, Samson is included. Why? Because God can take a person who has a total failure in different areas of his life and still use him. If God only used people who were perfect, nothing would ever get done. But instead, he uses ordinary people, those who have weaknesses and have failed in life. What should you do if you're Samson? Exactly what Samson finally did. Turn your life over to the Lord. Give him all the pieces and let him say to you, I will give you the power to break loose out of all of those things that are tying you down and causing your hangups and preventing me from working in your life. Only God knows the greatness and potential in your life, but you'll never bring it out on your own. He must do it in his strength. Let him start working it out for you on today. Well, beloved, this is our study for today, and our prayers that something has been said to encourage your life and your walk with the Lord. Be blessed.